almost all the serial killers that you will encounter, all of their home lives have been fragmented. They've been abused by their parents, have been abused by friends of family.
Where do ethics come from when our ancestors were fish and your worldview is coming from an unpurposed and ungoverned universe?
Ted Kaczynski, some might see him as mad, some might see him as a prophet, but he did have some interesting ideas.
Hello, you all right, Gav?
No, I need to die, basically, because my body's reached the end of its... Anyway, right, just carry on.
Well, one day we'll die. I'm just going to say to you, Gav, welcome to this dissonant trap again, where you're essentially going to be tortured for a bit, and I'm probably going to be tortured. So we're going to be discussing some topical, controversial, and challenging subject matters that are designed to induce cognitive dissonance.
You are, as always, listening to myself, Gav, and my good friend Josh, as we facilitate this ride into the absurd.
Crime and punishment. So I'll just start with like a quick little lead, and then you can riff on. So here it is, really. All crime is fake, and that's the end. See ya.
All right, Astakar, calm down.
So it's important here to like describe what crime is and where it comes from. And obviously it's something that's always existed, and it's just changed according to worldviews of like the dominant culture at the time and the definitions that they proclaim. For example, up until 1834, slavery was legal in the UK. So something like that was accepted and seen as morally right and legally just. And now, well, we know that slavery is wrong because it imposes your will on people you deem as inferior. And that is grounded in ignorance for people who did and still do believe it, for the millions of people who are still enslaved today in places like Africa. So the point is there that just because something is enshrined in law now, that doesn't always mean that it is right and moral. And then, of course, there are many things that are enshrined in law that are moral and right, such as don't kill someone. Or like taxation, for example, you're taxed through the roof, but if you get burgled, you're given a crime reference number and you'll never hear from the police ever again, while MPs are earning £78,000 plus expenses for their 2 homes. That is somehow right in society and allowed in law, but it doesn't make it morally right. And then, you know, another example of that could be how like animals are being murdered in their millions and a lot of waste. You think about the waste that goes into that, but it's not morally right, but it's legal and it's okay. So when I think of crime and punishment, I can't help but think of like Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky's epic.
It's a good book. I've never read it all the way through.
Yeah.
But, I find Dostoevsky really difficult, but very interesting.
It is, because he tends to put the name of them fully each time. It's like, dude, just put Rask, not Raskolnikov Dmitrievich Petronovia or whatever.
Different
every
culture,
time. Oh, cultures. Which one's good? Which one's bad? Anyway,
later.
We can boil it down to like this sort of Epicurean theory that man wants to avoid like bodily pain. Or aponia, not aporia, which is something else, and like this freedom for fear, which is like, I think that's ataraxias. And we've also got to be aware of this idealist nonsense that tries to hold up humans as some kind of moral pinnacle of being. People lie all the time. Most people lie in their lives prolifically and are dishonest
on a daily basis, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a matter of power, I think. And Plato long riffed about how our real identities can only truly reveal itself when no one is there. So I think that's important too as well. We are only good because we're governed by laws that are sort of tangible. And you only have to read some like Nietzsche or La Rochefoucauld to see that we have known how deceptive we can all be. And long before the Stanford Prison Experiment showed that deep down. So very few of us are actually morally or ethically perfect. And I know you want to go into the Stanford Prison a bit later on. So that's how I generalize and summarize my ideas behind crime. What do you think?
I wanted to go back a little bit because you were talking about social contract theory, weren't you, in terms of what we perceive as our reality and what the kind of laws that we adhere to, I guess I'm trying to say. Like, and what you said about laws changing
Yeah.
as society has progressed, certainly in terms of technology, is something that Durkheim used to talk about. So Emil Durkheim, a sociologist in Division of Labor, said, or argued, should I say, that as society grew more complex, social order made the transition from mechanical to organic. And he said that pre-industrial societies were held together by mechanical solidarity, which is a type of social order maintained by the collective consciousness of a culture. So I guess when I'm sort of talking about this sort of mechanical idea, is we sort of go back to I don't know, like the feudal system, something like that, where crime was seen as I don't know. I suppose Durkheim always sees crime as a fundamental expression of society, but essentially, I suppose we should explain organic solidarity as well. So basically, mechanical solidarity is things are always done in a certain way. That's how old societies used to function, and over time in an industrial society, this mechanical solidarity is replaced with something called organic solidarity, which is a social order based around an acceptance of economic and social differences. So in a capitalist society, the division of labor is specialized to the point that everyone is doing different things, like vastly different things. And instead of punishing members of a society for failure to assimilate to a set of common values, organic solidarity allows people with these different values to coexist. So laws, thus, are formalized morals based on restitution rather than revenge. So if we take like our ideas of a crime, I think Durkheim also says something like an act offends the common consciousness, not because it is criminal, but it is criminal because it offends that consciousness. Now, I think these two ideas are important here because if we look back through history, if we take like sort of the Middle Ages and then maybe the Enlightenment era and perhaps our modern era, some, I don't know, some general sort of periods. And if we look at the types of crime during that period, so we still have blasphemy today in the modern era, but 500 or 600 years ago, blasphemy was a much more serious crime, especially in the West.
As it should be.
Well, we can disagree with that in a second, because that's something. Because as far as I'm concerned, blasphemy is a victimless crime. But 600 years ago, or even no, say it's probably about 500 years ago, someone like Galileo, who basically challenged the Pope's theory that everything revolved around the Earth. So Galileo challenged that, and he was essentially punished.
Very naughty boy.
He was punished for offending the consciousness of the time. And we can also, if we transfer many different sort of ideas into this, so look at marrying children. So in certain societies now, it's still seen as just about acceptable. And obviously that ties into like paedophilia, which is obviously rightly seen as wrong now. But if you go back 200 years into the beginnings of the transition from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity, we'll see that this idea is kind of in flux. Like if you say went to England in 1850, you would almost certainly find men in their 20s getting married to girls of 13 and 14. And the reason for this isn't to do really with, it's kind of collective consciousness, but mostly it's due to determinism, because without medical knowledge to keep women alive in childbirth, they had to start early because the best chance of survival came from giving birth from the ages of about 14 to 20. So there are like really sort of interesting questions here, I think, about what offends the collective consciousness and why it offends the collective consciousness. And Durkheim also said that we often end up in a period of what he called the anomie, which is like a period without law. And that period is usually when we're moving between these two types of solidarities. And obviously we can keep moving between the mechanical and the organic. It's not just from the Middle Ages through to the industrial era. It can be from any sort of major societal change. So I'd imagine that, say, when the Roman Empire collapsed and we moved into the Dark Ages, there was a period of anomie there where laws and moral codes are in flux. So I think it's important that we understand that we are in a period now where our moral code is in flux. And what you said about Nietzsche, and we always come back to this, it's one of our like favorite little things when he talks about God is dead, and what he actually meant was the moral code is gone from our society. The moral ideas that we took from the Judeo-Christian religion, we're moving away from that now, and we're in this period of a sort of a flux of our collective consciousness.
That flux sort of alludes to a Hegelian sense of an antithesis, a thesis, and a synthesis of ideas that constantly happens. And Hegel described between the age of Romanticism and the age of Enlightenment. So yeah, like I did do a bit of Durkheim, and he's always sort of proclaimed this functionist view of crime, and it was very generalized. And there's nothing. And in, I think it's The Normality of Crime, one of his books, he said that crime is required to set these social boundaries, and punishment is not to stop a crime, but to manage it in order for a civilization to function properly. So that collective consciousness.
I think that's really good, actually. That actually sets it just proves an interesting point here, because it shows that Durkheim is aware that humans are essentially evolutionary primed animals, isn't it? And when he says that crime is a function of managing society, what he means by that is we're never going to eliminate all the psychotic tendencies.
No, and it's very much about the cause and effect in regards to that. So mankind cannot abide to these collective sentiments on cultural morality because of subcultures. Utilitarianists confuse acts that make us feel good as good, whereas that is not always the case, which we discussed earlier. But emerging from Durkheim's functionalist perspective of crime, we had Cohen's status frustration theory, which ties directly into what you were on about these subcultures, and it asserts that class-based subcultures, like the working classes, for example, we've used before, like the elements of those who voted for Brexit. They did that because they felt they were denied status in society, so they create this subculture. This isn't necessarily related to crime per se, but you can see how it leads to it. Say, like the EDL, for all intensive purposes, they're just like a subculture group of people who have somehow come together with these bizarre ideas. You could say that it's because of this collective frustration theory that he spoke of. So you can apply it to gangs in London. So this is more crime related. So it's mostly made up of young men who have grouped together to form a subculture that is delinquent and in rebellion. So that is Durkheim's functionalist view of crime in action there. You can see, like the left, like that you can sort of add that deterministic aspect for crime by saying, well, there's a reason for it, and there's poverty, and the status frustration theory, which Albert Cohen spoke of, and Durkheim's functionalist view of crime. And these are all perfectly valid psychosocial explanations for why crime happens. But we need to balance that out, I think, with Adler and even a bit of Jordan Peterson in terms of their calls for the individual to take responsibility over their lives.
No, I definitely agree there. There's a limit to our environmental determinism, because we all have human traits, don't we? We all have these evolutionary traits that we can't necessarily control what we get from our parents in terms of like the activated genes. And obviously these genes don't have to be activated. So in an equal society, they would be less likely to be activated. So there's a thing, isn't it, the warrior gene, which essentially codes for violence towards other people. And that's only activated in stressful environments as a child, essentially. You get coded for it. But whereas, like you said, Adler and various others would always suggest that we do have the ability to control our outbursts as humans. And I think that's very true, man. If we're all given a reasonable education and a reasonable chance at life, then there's no reason why we should resort to violent behaviors or behaviors we class as abhorrent.
And even if we're not given that reasonable education and a reasonable chance at life, that still doesn't excuse crime. And I'm sure you agree that there's plenty of people who haven't had such a great upbringing or a great start in life, great education, and have gone on to be law-abiding citizens and productive and create and do wonderful things.
I agree, man. There are things that everyone inherently knows are wrong. So as a child, you explore boundaries, don't you? So you might hurt an animal as a very young child and realize that you feel bad when you do that, or at least you should feel bad if you're I say a normalized human being. I mean, this is interesting as well. I mean, I almost use the word normal then, but that's wrong, because if we look at someone like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, he always thought that the thoughts and behaviors of the over-socialized are more restricted by society's expectations than those of a lightly socialized person. And that's it's a very short snippet of his manifesto. I mean, Ted Kaczynski, some might see him as mad, some might see him as a prophet, but he did have some interesting ideas about over socialization, which is essentially a straitjacket that society puts on people to monitor and control their behavior. So there is this argument, isn't there, that even thoughts and actions that we might see as completely fine. Well, this is kind of what you said earlier, actually. Things that you think that are moral are actually still wrong. because of the over socialization of our society and because of the to certain collective consciousness. So we can all agree that hurting animals are wrong, and as you're a kid you understand that. But what you're also taught in school is that getting a decent job and having loads of money is right. And what that doesn't say, or what it implicitly does say, is that being poor and not having loads of money is wrong, essentially. So you get these like early sort of views on life which are tainted by our collective consciousness, and then that creates problems with criminality in the future. Because what's the difference between someone that stabs someone in the street for half a gram of cocaine and someone that is a hedge fund manager who starves 500,000 people to death in a camp in China to make money making some clothes or making some Nike trainers or making some iPhone? They're the same thing in terms of criminality, I think, but it's the way that we deal with them. The restitution of our modern society means that the over-socialized people that Kaczynski talked about end up making the laws, and the lightly socialized, i.e. us, end up wondering, well, what's gone wrong here? Like, how have we ended up in this strange hyper-normalized reality? Like,
with morals, I think we can actually bring this down to something which is going to be dissonant for both of us. I think a little bit of a game for you here.
Okay.
So I know you like games, and we can then go back to riffing, I think. So the Ring of Gyges.
The Ring of Gyges. Is that like the lesser known Ring of Gondor? Like, is that yeah?
Yeah, actually you're kind of
We're
right.
off on an adventure, hobbits.
We're kind of right in a way. So Plato, wrote about, and this is essentially where Tolkien got his ideas for Lord of the Rings. So the Ring of Gyges asks us, what reasons do we have for acting morally? And do we act in reasons intrinsic to the attainment of moral motivation, or because we are coerced into appearing in a law-abiding way? So this is one of the great philosophic questions that is taken axiomatically by society. So the story behind it is a shepherd finds a ring, right? And he goes on to use this ring, which when you put on it turns you invisible. He goes on to use this ring to like seduce a queen, work with her to kill her own husband, who's the king of Lydia, and then he installs himself on the throne, right, using this ring. So Plato concluded with Glaucon that if we are given invisibility, then that will erode our morals, and that the anonymity that we get, these are the only things that separate us from being a good person from a bad one. So I'll just
really interesting.
And we can test this. Arguably, anyone at home can do the same. Where you can't really lie to yourself. You can pretend you're a good person, but listeners at home and Gav here, imagine you're in these scenarios. You find this Ring of Gyges, and when you put it on, you become invisible. That gives you this cape of anonymity, and you can do pretty much whatever you like. And now you might think in your mind,
I'm going to be good. I'm moral. I'm just.
Well, I'd say that's dissonant. So
I'd agree with him. I'm already thinking about what I would do. They're not good.
Well, man. Here's some scenarios for you that, and like,
oh man, I'm going to come across as an absolute sociopath now. But continue.
I think if we're all honest with ourselves, I think we know what's going to happen. So scenario one, Gav, you're walking past a Barclays bank. You see the entranceway to the vault, and it's guarded by 2 armed men. You could sneak in quite easily if you put the ring on and help yourself into some cash. You're there now. You've got the ring out your pocket. What do you do next?
Go and help myself to some cash because I'm invisible. Well, it's true, isn't it? Because the problem is the money corrupts absolutely, doesn't it? So when we're given, I suppose maybe it's the
or is it the power? The power,
or is it the power? Yeah,
the power corrupts.
Maybe it's all three, man. Because this is really interesting actually, because I've been given the environment that our politicians have been given, really a free ride to some free cash. So I take it, and I think that kind of almost instantly proves that unless we have proper checks and balances to control people's behaviors within the structures of power, then we're just going to end up with corruption. So I would help myself. I think everyone would.
Yeah, anyone who says no, I think.
Let us know your reasons. If you're not going to go in and take the money, please let us know why, and we'd be really interested.
And please try and prove to us why. If you just say
no, I wouldn't take the money,
then sorry, I don't believe you.
Yeah, fair.
Scenario 2. So you've took some money and you've bought loads of stuff, right? But you've run out of money at the end, and you forgot to buy your Glastonbury Festival ticket. So you drive down to Glastonbury, you go to the parking lot. You look at the fence, you pull out the ring, what do you do next?
Well, that's just an interesting, wasn't it? I mean, probably I wouldn't have spent all my money because I'm not
Yeah. Let's just say you did.
But let's just say I did. I guess I would just hop the fence, really. I mean, I've
Walk
actually
in
done
through
this.
the gate.
Oh well, you're invisible, aren't you? So you
Yeah.
can pretty much do what you want. But I mean, I've kind of done this before, to be honest with you. I have got into events and clubs and little festivals for free because that's what you do, isn't it? Because you chance it and you think, well, and especially under the influence of alcohol, etc., you end up losing some of these what they call social inhibitions, aren't you? The moral acceptance is you pay for your ticket, but if you haven't got a lot of money and you're young, you just end up trying to do things for free. And I think we've all done that. In a way, I suppose we would do it now. Like, I'm trying to think, if I was, let's say, even if I wasn't invisible and I needed to get into a festival for free, I think I would probably try it anyway. This is an interesting one to consider because I view, like, something like Glastonbury, I view the organisers and the festival itself as just another corporate entity. I don't really view any of the people in it as, or the people running it, should I say, as worthy of me having to pay full price. Like, I mean, the drinks inside are like £6 or £7 each anyway. So you pay like a tenner for a burger. So it's already an immoral ripoff. So, I mean, I am just justifying my own sociopath here, I guess. But but I mean, I suppose maybe this is what Dirk was saying, where it is crime is a function because it's a function of resistance, as far as I'm concerned. That
might be dissonance, but
well, there is dissonance because there's two ideas here. If it's a function of resistance, then I'm resisting paying full price for a corporate event because I think it's overpriced. But you could also apply that to, say, looting, where someone goes and smashes a storefront window in a protest about statues and steals a bunch of Nike trainers, and their argument would literally be the same, wouldn't it? They'd be like, well, this is a corporation, it doesn't matter. You're no better. And that's actually an eye-opener, isn't it? That's a really eye-opening analysis in a way, because it shows that the justification for many of the things that people do in riots and protests, and many of the things people do in claiming to be moral, they're not at all, really. They're kidding themselves. They're locked in the dissonance trap.
You're right. Even though I've done that, I snuck into Led Zeppelin, which was brilliant. Loved it. But even so, I was still breaking the law. And you could say, arguably, that all the people who'd set that show up, who need to earn money, who put a lot of time and effort into that, in the same way as like Nike, you know me, I'm not keen on big corporations like that. But still, it's someone's shop. It's someone's job to go do. Someone's identity is fixed around that. And so when we get these crimes that are committed, it will affect someone, and someone will be a victim regardless. Now, I get it. And you're right. Even I'm dissonance now. If I had the ring, would I sneak into Glastonbury? Yeah, absolutely. Let's take it to the next scenario now. So you've gone to Glastonbury. It was brilliant. You get to see Pink.
I've got to see Pink. It was great.
Well, you got to meet Pink because you had your ring, and you could just go and just take it off when you're in a changing room. Not that she's changing. Oh no. And you go,
hello.
And she's like,
who are you?
I'm the fairy godmother. I'm going to write you a new four-chord wonder that sounds exactly like the rest of your song.
So you lose the ring at the festival. You've had a great time meeting.
I lose the ring at the festival.
You've lost all your money and you find yourself homeless on the streets for 3 years because you don't know what to do, and you just plummet. And you make a friend on the street, right, eventually, who you go begging with. And one day he passes out from drinking. And a passerby comes, so he shoves 50 grand into your mate's pocket. And your friend is nice to you, but you know he would take that cash and abandon you so he could go and restart his life. He wouldn't give you anything. You just know that. And all of a sudden, you're looking around the bottom of your rucksack and you find the ring. And you're like, what? I've been homeless for 3 years. You look at the envelope then, gently peering out from underneath his jacket. And you could take it easily without him knowing. After 3 years on the street and you've got your ring, what do you do?
So I would take some of the money, but I wouldn't take all of it, because I think this goes back to something we've discussed in previous editions of the Dissonance Trap, and this is all to do with Nash's equilibrium, isn't it? And it's to do with the relative payoff. And I think I would literally wait till he was passed out unconscious, because we would just have an argument otherwise. But I would definitely split the money. I might split it in half, to be honest with you. I'd take 25 grand and leave him with the other 25, because to take it all is just cruel and unnecessary.
So only steal 25 grand.
Well, no, but think about it. Like this is a similar. If you know that he's going to waste it on drink anyway, then
we might not. We don't know that.
Yeah, I think I could make that judgment.
I think. Do you think you can only make that judgment because it fits your narrative?
Yeah,
you feel
quite
better.
possibly.
Hey, man, like if that was me, I'd probably do something similar to you. Maybe, leave half. But at the end of the day, you're still committing a crime, I think. And this is what, just to keep that overarching narrative here, if we're looking at crime and punishment, right? Okay, so you take 25K, say. So the next scenario is, from that 25,000, you start a successful business. You get married happily. Oh, you're in love with this amazing woman. And one night there is a break-in at your home while you're away on business in Tokyo. And the intruder tortures and kills your wife in cold blood. A few days later, you manage to find out where the killer lives through a friend who happens to be in the police. And he gives you 100% proof that this is the person you want. Gives you CCTV and fingerprints. So you drive to the area where this guy lives and you can see his front door. You pull out the ring and you gaze at it, knowing full well that you could get in the house, kill him by poisoning his drink or whatever. No one would ever know it was you. No eyewitnesses would be able to account for any strangers going in or out the house, which also has CCTV. What do you do next?
Well, this is difficult, isn't it? We're going back to the difference between mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity here, aren't we? With the difference between revenge and restitution. You are talking about murdering another person, aren't you?
Yes.
Like, that's basically what we're talking about here. And I can't honestly say with any great certainty what I would do in a situation where I had the ability to kill someone and get away with it. Yeah, not sure.
I would say, and this is something for all the listeners at home as well, is that you would say exactly the same thing if it was out loud and outside of our minds. But within, I think you know and I know exactly what we would do, but we don't want to say it because it's socially unacceptable. And here is the dissonance. And I think that's absolutely fine. I don't think you should say what you do now, and I don't think you have to. But I think deep down what it reveals is that at our core, we are all capable of terrible things. These sort of morals of what's good and bad, we can all slip in and out of them. Here's the key point there of the Ring of Gaiji, is that Plato concluded that our real identity can only truly reveal itself when no one is there. You may be in that situation, you may not actually decide. You might look at the ring and go, I can't do this. I can't go in and kill this guy for what he's done. And that is a possibility as well. But you just think about the amount of people who could and would do it, then we can see this blurring of what is right.
I guess your argument there is kind of the Hobbesian argument, isn't it, of the state of nature, where without law, we're all savages, essentially, or at least the Hobbes version of savage, not Rousseau's version.
Yeah, he was an absolutist, so yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Plato there that our true self only comes out when we're on our own, because that's very true. If you think about when you are on your own in your own home and the strange little things that you do and the little behaviors and stuff that you probably wouldn't do around other people. I know I do strange things that I wouldn't do around others, I guess. And I guess that's why I find it quite difficult to live with other humans. What I'm trying to say is that there are some behaviors, though, that are inherently wrong, that we know are wrong. And those are the sort of murder and other sort of offenses that everyone knows, or most people, the most over-socialized, even the over-socialized, know that is wrong. And I think that comes down to what I was talking about earlier about the sort of inherent programming we have as children before we learn anything, before we learn about the world around us, before we learn to read and write. And there are things that kids know are morally reprehensible just from a sort of basic living organism point of view. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that.
I believe that worldviews form this, and actually this brings us nicely onto the next part of how we intrinsically know what is right and wrong. By the way, just going back a little bit, I'm merely trying to point out self-righteousness, and I think that's a real enemy of like progress and reason, and that if we think we're really good people when actually we're not even able to analyze and answer these questions honestly, then you've got to question your underlying psyche and the way your brain works. And if you can be better, this is what this is about. It's actually just trying to be more honest with ourselves to be better. But in order to find out what we're really capable of, I think we need to answer Pythagoras' ultimate dictum here, which is know thyself. And he mentioned, know thyself, then you will know the universe and God. Now, and this is where there's clash a little bit, but bear with me. So he was essentially he was essentially laying down the groundwork for the likes of Nietzsche and Spinoza to later elaborate on this issue in like this pantheistic way. So Nietzsche was big on these ideas, but believed it was pretty much pathetic if you didn't live or develop them further, right? He was really abrupt in this. And it's a trait he definitely took from the ideas of original sin. He said something like, he who fights monsters should make sure that in the process he doesn't become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze into you. So if we want to hold ourselves truly accountable, we must at times look inward and realize that this abyss exists within us all, and that we've got to keep it in check, unless we mean to embrace it and shift from passive contemplation into something far worse. So in a way, we need to stare into the abyss to truly understand ourselves fully, in order to help us regulate our behaviors to maintain a moral life. So out of this realization, we are presented with these following questions. Do we believe a society should determine its own laws? Question number 2, can laws be made subjectively? So slavery used to be okay, for example, now it isn't. Like arguably slavery was a massive business in the Roman Empire long before like white people went anywhere near Africa. They were like the professionals at slavery, but now it isn't. So do we believe in objective morality? Do we believe that there is objective truth and the basis for morality? These are massive questions, okay?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, and if you could just give me a yes or no on this, do you believe in objective morality?
No.
So then there is no right or wrong. And that means that where are these moral guidelines come from if you evolved from fish? Now, if there is no right or wrong, which is what you're saying, what gives you the right, Gavin, to say what is right and what is wrong? Because I believe there is objective morality.
I guess I probably argued earlier that there was objective morality. Maybe I should clarify the yes or no into a slight deviance, because there are a couple of things, like I said, that especially as self-aware organisms, humans that we are, that taking another life doesn't feel right, does it? Like,
where'd you get that from? Where's that come from, Gav?
I think that's more of like a subconscious feeling as anything, and I'm not sure everyone feels this way. That's why I said no, because I personally feel that way, but I don't think everyone. Like, there's quite a significant proportion of human beings who do not feel that way. So that's why I'm saying that I don't think objective morality is actually possible.
So do you think there's objective truth?
That's an even more difficult question to answer, really.
Because the problem with this is that this comes down to our moral view, and objective morality feeds in directly with what crime is and who is allowed to say that's wrong and that's right. This is where objective morality comes in. It's quite tricky, having this objective truth and the basis for morality. If I ask you, do you believe in objective morality? And you say yes, then where does that objective truth or the barometer of what is moral come from? That leads to us next thing. But if you say no, there is no right or wrong, then we are going down the road of Richard Dawkins, for example, who said there's no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, and nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. There's a tricky route to go down. Like, if you think about it, doctors used to, and medical experts, they used to promote smoking, heroin, sugary drinks.
Yeah.
So scientists and doctors can be bought just like politicians and be wrong. So if you believe in evolution, for example, and that we evolved from fish into philosophers, and that we are protoplasm bouncing around in the cosmos, and we evolved through unguided processes to get to where we are today, then if we are all just protoplasms, bags of biological stuff, and who are just brain fizzing, whose ancestors were fish, then what basis can you complain about anything from an ethical perspective? Where do ethics come from when our ancestors were fish and your worldview is coming from an unpurposed and ungoverned universe?
Well, I think I could possibly answer where it comes from. I think I know where you're going with this, because we've had a similar discussion this before, haven't you? And you would say, I think, to preempt you, that a lot of our laws and moral codes actually come from interpretations of religion.
I am going that way.
That is basically where a lot of our legal codes come from.
Yeah.
But I think not all of our legal codes come from there, because I think Dawkins is an absolutist when he says that we are in a cold and unforgiving universe. There is a definite truth in that, and we should never think that we're special and some sort of little magical race.
So do you believe there's no evil and no good?
The problem is you're asking me to give you an absolute answer when there isn't one.
So you don't believe in absolutes?
No.
Is that an absolute what you just said, though?
Yeah, I mean, it's a form of absolute, I guess, but
I thought you said there are no absolutes.
But I don't believe that in this question of laws and morality that we can be so absolute. I think this is such a deep question about the very nature of what it is to be human, that
Yeah.
we can explore our views on this subject in no end,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's ever possible to give a definitive answer here. We go back to the Bertrand Russell concept of we need to look at and engage with all the possible answers and come to a rational conclusion, isn't it? We need to be rational about this. And we can look at this empirically, that there are scientific studies that have been performed on monkeys and children about this kind of moral quandary. So there were two monkeys in a cube, like a Perspex cube, and they would give one a biscuit and he would eat the biscuit, and they wouldn't give the other monkey biscuit. And over time, when one monkey realized that he was being given a biscuit and the other wasn't, he would stop eating the biscuit they were given until the other monkey was given a biscuit, or he would try and share his biscuit. But if the other monkey couldn't see him, then sometimes he would eat the biscuit. And so on and so forth. And it's the same with kids. If they can see that someone else is being denied the same item as they are, then sometimes they will refuse to engage or refuse to eat that item. But if they know there's another person there and that other person can't see them, then a lot of the time they will eat the biscuit. So in that experiment, there's a leaning towards what I talked about earlier, wasn't there? Where we said about Plato, where on our own we become our true selves. And I guess that experiment supports that, is if we're interacting with others and we're in a unit, then we're aware that we need to strategize and we need to sort of become a bit more moral. Whereas if we can't be seen, then we can just stuff our faces.
Yeah, and how do we become more moral if we can't define where morality comes from? I think that's a really good point. So do you agree with Plato that we only become our true selves when we're not seen?
Yeah, that definitely ties in with what you asked me earlier about whether or not I think that it's possible to be morally objective.
This definitely induces dissonance, and it will to any listeners here. But if you don't believe there is no absolute truths, well, is that an absolute truth? And the answer is yes, it is. So therefore, absolute truths do exist. I believe they do. So it's not an issue for me to say what is right and wrong. And in the same way, if you believe what Plato said, that our real identity can only truly reveal itself when no one is there, well, that's an absolute. And there you agree with him. So I think there's something intrinsically in us that you were talking about earlier. We know it's wrong to torture animals. I agree, yeah. And I think that is the basis for objective morality. So, for example, Nietzsche, he's not for those who are easily offended, and he was an atheist. I would say he was more a Christian atheist, and I'll come to the reason why I say that later. He's not for people who have this naive or nervous disposition towards the callous realities of life. And generally, I think philosophy is a science that tends to dissolve one's equanimity. And he made no bones about how awful humans generally are, and tended to do this without the levity of Schopenhauer. He once said that there's only one inborn error, which is the notion that we exist purely to be happy. And as long as we continue to believe this error, the world will appear to be full of contradictions, because at every step, we are guaranteed to experience that the world is certainly not arranged for the purposes of being happy. Quite funny, because he summed it up and he said that's why the faces of almost all elderly people are deeply etched with such disappointment. So just like this concept of original sin is never really going away, all it does is it changes. And we've seen that now in many social justice warriors, for example, seem to think that if you are white, then you're automatically guilty by association of what your ancestors may or may not have done. So sin is merely changing its shape, I'd say. And much like the concept continues to adapt, so does a worldview that incorporates a god of some kind. And this is what undermines Nietzsche's worldview, is the fact that at its core, it's still very much a Christian one in disguise, purely because he believes we should be kind to the weak, which he states is an important aspect of being Übermensch. This insists really that he recognizes the importance of love thy neighbor to some extent. Thus, he doesn't really believe, like many atheists, like Richard Dawkins, who says there's no design, no purpose, no evil, no good.
Are you saying that Nietzsche is almost evangelical then?
You're spot on. This is exactly where I'm going. I'm saying that he was more of a Christian atheist, where he is an atheist in that he didn't believe in God, but he took and accepted the laws that were given divinely as absolutes that should be adhered to. And I can prove that as well. And he does contradict himself. He said in Thus Spoke Zarathustra that there's no divine ground of being, no absolute standard of truth or order, and no heavenly father. But he contradicts himself later on. And he does show that actually there are absolute in the things he's saying. Because if someone says there's no absolutes, well, like I did to you, Gav, is that an absolute? Yes, it is. Okay, so there must be absolutes. He's not on the same line as atheists, such as William Provine, who's professor of history of biology, who said that there are no gods, no purposes, and no goal-directed forces of any kind. He said there's no life after death, and there is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life and no free will for humans either. That leaves you in this like pitiless place of despair where there is no good and bad. Whereas I reject that.
I kind of agree with you, man, that you can't live in a world that has no moral framework.
You're not actually as much of an atheist as you think then.
Well, it all boils down to where we think these laws come from. And I think there are some inbuilt traits.
Intrinsic. They would say, nope, you're wrong, Gav. I'm an atheist and there's no purpose, no evil, no good.
Especially if you're believing in absolutes, you're saying that the atheists are absolute in their belief. We're getting into sort of a loop of where we think these morals are coming from.
I think you're getting in a loop of where good and bad comes from. I'm not. You see, I've got a worldview.
Nietzsche's ideas were misappropriated, weren't they, by Hitler? I mean, the Nazis misappropriated Nietzsche's ideas. And you're kind of explaining why in this little section, aren't you? That because Nietzsche's ideas actually are based significantly on an idea of a higher power. And all he's doing is he's kind of placing the emphasis of that acceptance of that higher morality on individuals rather than God. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think we're kind of synthesizing these ideas quite nicely here because he is an atheist. He didn't believe in God, but what he couldn't escape from is his underlying deep belief in morality, which was given to him by Christianity.
This is where we always differ, I think, and maybe I am suffering from distance, but I have done some research on this. We've argued about morality a lot over the years, and let's go back to the pre-Christian era. Let's go back further. Let's go back past the Mesopotamian era of the first city-state civilization, which is largely agreed to be the Sumerians. Do we agree that the Sumerians are probably the first big city-state civilization? Like, I mean, we don't really have records. We don't really have records that go much before then anyway, so it's difficult. But if we get rid of Christianity for a second and we go back to Zoroastrianism, which was the religion of the Sumerian people, and we actually see there's quite a similar creation myth there. There's the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is very similar. I mean, all these monotheistic religions essentially are the same religion anyway. They come from this basic idea. So if we were to stop there, then I would agree with you that our laws and our morals, aside from not killing people, which I think is innate to our species and a lot of other species as well, or at least for most individuals within the genus. But if we were to stop history there, then all our moral codes come from this creation myth idea that we trying to explain our existence in the depths of the unforgiving universe. This creation myth is what helps us make it through the day, let's say. But we can actually go back further. And if we go back further, we end up in the Neolithic period, the Neanderthals. And the reason I'm going back this far is there's a really interesting historical find, which I think shows that our ideas of organized religion being the basis for all morality are wrong. They found a body of a Neanderthal man, very well preserved. Like, I don't know where they found him, in a peat bog somewhere. And the guy had an amputation on his arm, as probably a young man, they reckon. And he'd lived for another 30 or 40 years as essentially a disabled member of a Neanderthal tribe. Now, what that shows to me is that people without an organized religion, people who lived without a high level of technology, people whose lives were incredibly difficult and who lacked a lot of the words to describe what we're talking about now, still cared enough about that tribal family member to feed him, to hunt for him, to help make his clothes, to essentially help keep him alive for 3 decades after what would have been a fatal injury for most people in that period. So for me, that's why I say we can't have these question of absolutes for morality isn't something we can easily answer. I do have to disagree, even with your knowledge of the philosophers and the religious theologians who talk about this era. I can't agree that we can see morality in absolutes, man. And like Durkheim says, we're in this period of the anomaly. We're in these fluxes between these solidarities where it's changing. And if we are stuck in this idea that our laws and our moral codes of restitution come from these religious ideas, then how are we going to move forward?
You might be sort of arguing with yourself. You're saying that you don't believe that there's any objective morality in terms of what a crime is.
I'm saying that you can't base all of that on the concepts of a religion or a series of religions.
I don't think you can either, but you did say that you can't get behind the idea of an objective morality, and yet you say you have an innate feeling that killing is wrong. Well, that's an absolute. But there's nothing wrong with that, Gav. But I do agree that it's not just religion.
Doesn't that come from the evolution rather than religion, though? So you can't say that
Well, no, because why did other groups kill each other? What, to survive?
That's due to determinism. That's environmental factors. That's nothing to do with an objective morality. That's to do with determinism. So that's to do with the way that we have to interact in a post scarcity environment. And this is why we still suffer from high levels of violence in our society. We've got the technology to be in a post-scarcity society, but we haven't used our technology efficiently. Perhaps in there is another question about morals, isn't it? Because why haven't we used our technology efficiently? So I guess in terms of your story from earlier, our society has the magic ring of Gaijan or whatever, doesn't it? And instead of using it to make everyone equal, we've used it to make a handful of people very rich and a large amount of people very poor.
So here's where we might be butting heads here, is that you're still behind the shield of determinism, whereas I reject determinism.
That's a dirty sentence, that is.
Well, it's not, because we sort of agreed earlier on that we need to take aspects of determinism and free will to say, well, if someone's going out and murdering someone, well, yeah, there are going to be deterministic principles behind that, but there's also the element of taking responsibility, which requires free will.
But now you're conflating murder and determinism. So I would say that murder in cold blood has nothing to do with determinism.
So murder sometimes is okay if it's deterministic.
Well, it is, because if someone's threatening you with death and
is that an absolute?
Yes.
But that's what I mean. No, I don't. No, I disagree. I think that is a moral dilemma, but I don't think just because you're being threatened that determinism means you can kill someone. I'm saying that we combine the two to create compatibilism, which is the result of free will being combined with determinism. And this is that free will works well with determinism in the way that Adler works well with Rousseau, to equate to compatibilism, which is where free will works in harmony with determinism, because free will is typically taken to be a necessary condition for moral responsibility. And so compatibilism is sometimes expressed in a way of being compatible between moral responsibility and determination. Like, I don't think there is just a deterministic explanation for something and a free will. I think there's a combination of both if we're going to be scientific and we're going to be objective. So the two groups coming together and killing self, actually, that's not just determinism. That's not just, this is out of my hands. This is thrust onto me by my environment. No, this is still making a choice to go and kill someone. I
suppose that is kind of historically true, isn't it? Like the empires of the early European ages, although determinism forced them into conflict over land and space, they could have also worked together. They made a choice. They made a choice to fight each other, and that's based on the choices of those in positions of power who want to keep that power. So I guess we've kind of come to a sort of agreement there.
Well, I think you are at your heart a compatibilist, and that shows in our rational centrism. That's exactly what we're going for. But when Nietzsche said, like, man is the cruelest animal, it wasn't to berate us. It was to present a moral baseline for which we should strive above. This phrase is showing clearly why idealists are offended by inference of hierarchy and the idea that seek to promote greatness, which they hate, right? And it's a shame that they don't wish to see the nuance in the complex work of free will and determinism, which is compatibilism. And so his contradiction and our own contradictions beckons when saying that we should love mankind for God's sake. Nietzsche said that, but he was an atheist, right? But there's a reason why, and I'm still getting to it. I'm sorry it's a bit long and drawn out, and I'm nearly done. But he says we should love mankind for God's sake, since he is no longer able to do so. So he respected the humble who had their faith when compared to the garish, chattering elite and their so-called glib, enlightened classes with their cultured and modern ideas. And he was repulsed at their lack of shame and their easy insolence, like in comparison to someone who's humble and godly and was as good as they possibly could. In our shared journey here of deep epistemology, like to understand crime and punishment, we shouldn't take our liberties axiomatically, and we have a responsibility to understand the free will and deterministic natures of ourselves. For example, if we are just a meat bag, then that's fizzing as protoplasm, then why do we apply meaning to your life, our own lives, and others if they were just meat bags too? So what we can do is to get over all this, I think, is take this like Kierkegaardian leap of faith in the same way that he did. So he didn't feel the need to justify his love of Christ using his, what Nietzsche called faulty, rational, clunking faculties of a tortured mind. But he was more on about instead accepting with existential dread that sometimes to be an excellent philosopher, we must also learn when not to ask the question. Or as he has put it, like to have faith is to lose your mind and win God. But sometimes winning God gives you a better moral baseline to then proclaim what is right and wrong. Do you see what I mean?
To just take a blind leap of faith requires an element of apathy, doesn't it?
You're right. You're right. Like aporia, that feeling of like confusion. Derrida, the philosopher, he said we should be proud of that though, because when we have that leap of faith and it does induce that dissonance, dare I say it, well, we should be proud of that we're still trying to synthesize those ideas and trying to get to the bottom of what is morally right and wrong and why crime should be punished and what crimes are worse than others.
Still think about a leap of faith, like
taking a leap of faith sometimes is just easier. Like, so you can battle with our mind all we like. And it's a bit like Nietzsche. We battle with free will. We battle with determinism. We battle with if we are here through a god or if we're just protoplasm fizzing. But at the end of the day, we can sort of sidestep that somewhat and just say, if we just take a leap of faith and say, yeah, there are absolutes, and we can take some of like the biblical interpretation, apply it to give a baseline as to what is right and wrong, then all that does is nicely align us with where our fairly robust criminal justice system is today, which is something that isn't perfect, but it's not based around atheistic principles. And in that regard, they've also been wise to take this leap of faith. Some believe we are born good or bad. Like Schopenhauer believed that, but it's contradictory because if the character is unchangeable and free will is a lie, i.e.
I can't agree that some are born good and some are born evil. Not entirely. Scientifically, that's wrong.
I think you're right,
We go back to genetic activation. Through evolution, there are traits that are considered useful via the organism of the human being. So like psychopathy and sociopathy is a useful survival trait, but it's not considered morally acceptable in the sort of general mass of the over-socialized in human civilization, where obviously we know that it's actually a useful trait for CEOs and for business leaders worldwide as a way to disconnect themselves from the suffering they cause in reality. But I can't agree that people are born in certain ways, man, because if you're abused as a child, then that will change the way or your organism, your body develops, and it activates certain things, certain aspects of your recessive genome. It'll change the way that you see the world, and it'll change the way that you treat others because of the way that you treated yourself. So almost all the serial killers that you will encounter, that you will research, that you can look up, all of their home lives have been fragmented. They've been abused by their parents, have been abused by friends or family. The traits are always there. So you could argue that yes, they are born intrinsically evil, but they have to be activated. We don't exist in isolation. But the most interesting thought experiment we could maybe glean from this is if we separated out, say, 50 individuals, random individuals from our society, and put them on a desert island, and left them for a decade or maybe 50 years and see what kind of society they would develop. Because there's two sort of schools of thought here, isn't there? There's the Lord of the Flies school of thought, where if you leave them on the island, they'll develop a tribal society which is violent, and there'll be a strong leader, and they'll essentially butcher those that don't conform. Which is kind of a mirror for what some people see our own society as, isn't it? And the other school of thought is an example of this in real life, where a group of teenagers from an island in the South Pacific got stuck, and they stole a boat, took it for a joyride, the engine broke, and they drifted for days, and they ended up on a small uninhabited island, and they created their own society in an actual Lord of the Flies style system, and they were all rescued about a year and a half later. And they were all healthy. They basically created not a utopia, but they'd managed to run a small society without harming each other, without injuring each other, and without resorting to dictatorial systems. So I think that a lot of it is about the environment that we're presented, and the way that we react to that environment is kind of a mixture of the determinism of our genes and the determinism of what's going on around us, I guess.
And free will, because what they've done is contrary to the earlier examples you gave of determinism, where people are killing each other because of their environment. Well, they've done the opposite. They've landed in this testing, hostile situation, and rather than let determinism be an excuse for killing each other, they've actually used their elements of moral free will to create a safer society until they can be rescued in the face of adversity. They've taken responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the third.
So
that kind of
compatibilism.
that fits into the second thing, isn't it? Because your free will defines how you react to the society around you, isn't it?
Yeah, and I see where you're going, and I'd agree that we're not born inherently good or bad. The character within us is changeable, I believe. I think that anyone who's done terrible things can go on to redeem themselves and do good things. We're back more towards crime now, I think, and that it's possible for an impaired character to act otherwise. We sort of agree with compatibilism. We sort of agree that determinism and free will can aspect the culture and how it decides what is right or wrong.
Yeah.
We've come to some sort of moral baseline as to our worldviews and perhaps I might have taken the leap of faith. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think, no, I'm not ready to take a leap of faith just yet. I'm still not convinced about the origins. I'm not convinced of the origins of our moral system at all.
I'm not saying that only comes from divine intervention at all, because you're right, like some kind of social law and the social contract existed long before the Bible come along.
I think we don't agree on the influence of religion on the moral codes of modern society. I guess that's due to a slight difference in how we see the actual human being. I mean, I guess we both see them as a meat bag to some degree.
Biologically,
but that's fine. Like, we can agree to disagree there. So,
do you accept though that there are absolutes now? Then
I guess so. Yeah, I'm going to have to, because if I can't refute it,
and I think you need to, because that's how we define what is good and bad crime, right? Otherwise, if we don't have absolutes, well, we are all just star stuff, and we are a way for the universe to know itself, and there's no purpose, no goal-directed forces.
I think we can be both those things, though, can't we?
You can now, We can say I'm an atheist, but I can take some of the principles that might have given us our culture from a biblical perspective. Thou shalt not kill, for example.
I mean, I suppose from my personal perspective,
we accept that the ring of Gyges is a good indication to show us our true self.
Yes, I could agree with that.
We accept that there are absolute truths.
I will hesitantly agree with some of that. Yeah,
I know it's true. And we can accept that free will and determinism, when combined, can equate to a tautological perspective that works for both sides in that of compatibilism.
Well, I am supportive of compatibility, yeah.
And that we can see that what is deemed law doesn't necessarily mean it's good. And we've seen the example of how laws have changed over time. We can see, for example, slavery used to be okay, and it's not anymore, which is a good thing.
First part of our podcast has been quite heavy going, but what we really wanted to do was sort of describe to you how it's incredibly difficult to get a definitive vision of right and wrong, especially in today's modern society. And what we're going to do in part 2 of our distance travel is to have a look at some real world applications of this theory, because I'm aware that a lot of the stuff we talk about is highly theoretical, and we need to sort of try and take these ideas and apply them to a real world setting. So what we're going to do in part 2 is we're going to look at some recent examples of crime, some recent examples of reactions to that crime, whether that be revenge or restitution, and essentially do some analysis about collective consciousness of our modern culture and how morality is viewed in a lens of late stage capitalism, where the morals of our society have been skewed by the deterministic requirements of business.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's fair.
So we'll end that there.
Yeah, nice one, Gav. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, mate. And we'll see you for part 2 in a few moments.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello, I'm Spooky Stevens. You don't know me, but I know you. Now for a nice maxim by La Rochefoucauld. We are more able than willing. Often we imagine that things are impossible because we want to excuse ourselves in our own eyes. Ta-ra for now.